There was a marked boundary on the map that even the United States military feared to cross. In the spring of 2003, the Pentagon outlined an enormous kill box in western Iraq, and the directive to Delta Force was clear: do not enter, no air cover. No medical evacuation, certain death. Yet, while the most powerful military on Earth hesitated, someone else was already operating deep inside. They were not Navy SEALs. They were not the British SAS. They were a shadowy unit that had been embedded in the desert for weeks before the war officially started. They outwitted billion-dollar satellites using nothing more than binoculars and open-topped Land Rovers. They seized a heavily defended airbase guarded by thousands with fewer than 50 men, and they accomplished it in terrain the Pentagon had judged unsurvivable. Were these hardened operators? How did they execute one of the most remarkable special operations campaigns of the 21st century directly under Saddam Hussein's gaze? And why has the full account of the Scud hunters remained largely hidden until now, as elite American intelligence analysts and Delta Force planners finally assembled the true picture of events unfolding in western Iraq? An uneasy silence filled their briefing rooms. Satellite imagery they had trusted for weeks showed nothing but empty desert. These orbital systems worth billions could read license plates from space and detect heat through concrete. Yet they repeatedly reported a barren landscape on the ground. The truth was written in the sand. Narrow six-wheeled Land Rover tracks cut deep into forbidden territory, weaving through dry riverbeds and across exposed plateaus where movement should have meant death. These were not the heavy prints of Humvees or British armored vehicles. They were precise tracks from machines designed over decades for exactly this environment. The realization struck hard. The Australians had been there all along, while satellites saw emptiness. These men lived inside the red zone, dismantling Iraq's prized Scud missile capability. Declassified records and first-hand accounts confirmed that the Australian Special Air Service Regiment did more than endure the western desert. They thrived. But to understand how this happened, one must look to the weeks before the invasion, at the debates over doctrine and the contrasting military philosophies that shaped events. It was a clash between reliance on overwhelming technology and faith in human resilience. When tested, the difference proved decisive. Western Iraq was brutal terrain stretching from the borders with Jordan and Syria to the Euphrates. River valley temperatures swung from blistering heat near 40 degrees Celsius by day to near freezing at night. There was no shade, no water, and no margin for error. The environment itself was a weapon. United States Central Command assessed the region as too distant from logistical support to sustain small units safely. The nearest major base lay more than 400 kilometers away. Helicopters could barely reach the area, and enemy air defenses made evacuation unreliable. The zone lay beyond the golden hour radius, meaning wounded troops could not be guaranteed surgery within 60 minutes. For Delta Force and Task Force 20, this was an unacceptable risk. So western Iraq was largely left to aerial surveillance and long-range strikes. The Australians chose differently. One squadron of the Special Air Service Regiment, based at Campbell Barracks in Western Australia, had trained for years in long-range desert reconnaissance, drawing heritage from the original British SAS in North Africa during the Second World War. They refined a doctrine centered on self-sufficiency, endurance, and stealth. They believed the most effective special forces unit was the one capable of surviving independently in the harshest conditions for the longest time. Saddam Hussein relied heavily on mobile Scud missile launchers hidden across western Iraq. These weapons threatened Israel and could have drawn it into the conflict, fracturing the coalition. Saddam's crews concealed launchers under bridges, inside warehouses, among palm groves, and on disguised commercial trucks. Satellites struggled to distinguish them from civilian equipment. Technology alone could not solve the problem. Solution required human eyes close to the ground. What Australian veterans called the Mark I eyeball operators entered Iraq quietly on March 18, 2003, 2 days before the official invasion, while shock and awe prepared to light up Baghdad. The Australians were already hunting in silence. Their 6-wheel drive Land Rovers had been modified over 20 years, stripped of doors, roofs, and any unnecessary weight. The open design reduced noise and gave a full field of vision, allowing crews to hear distant movement across the desert. Sound traveled clearly at night, and the exposed operators detected threats long before they appeared. When observing targets, the squadron used layup positions. Vehicles were hidden in depressions under camouflage netting matched perfectly to desert tones. Operators established observation posts, sometimes only hundreds of meters from Iraqi positions. They lay motionless for hours or days as patrols passed within 50 meters unaware. When a Scud launcher was confirmed, engagement began with a quiet transmission of coordinates, followed by laser designation. Minutes later, a precision-guided bomb destroyed the target. The Australians vanished back into the sand before anyone knew they had been there. Unlike the rapid, aggressive American doctrine, emphasizing decisive engagement and heavy support, the Australian method prioritized patience, concealment, and autonomy. Lessons from the failed Scud hunt of the 1991 Gulf War showed that air power alone could not find mobile launchers. In 2003, only one Allied force placed observers on the ground deep in hostile territory for 42 consecutive days. One squadron operated without returning to a forward base. They endured ration monotony, water scarcity, mechanical failures, and relentless heat while maintaining constant vigilance. The Scud threat from western Iraq effectively disappeared. Not a single missile was launched toward Israel during the invasion. This preserved coalition unity and prevented a broader regional war. On April 16, 2003, the squadron undertook an extraordinary mission against Al Assad Air Base, located roughly 200 kilometers west of Baghdad, one of Iraq's largest and most important air installations. It contained more than 50 MiG fighters and an estimated 8 million kilograms of high explosives. Rather than waiting for armored columns, the Australians advanced with a force of roughly 40 to 60 men. They called in precise airstrikes on selected perimeter targets, demonstrating overwhelming control without destroying the facility. The psychological effect was immediate. Iraqi defenders realized coalition air power could eliminate any position. Resistance collapsed, personnel fled or surrendered. The Australians entered the base and secured it intact, capturing vast stores of weapons, aircraft, and intelligence material before American units formally assumed control elsewhere. Near Al came close to the Syrian border patrols, engaged numerically superior Iraqi forces. Using their shoot and scoot doctrine, they unleashed overwhelming firepower from Browning 50 caliber machine guns, Mark 19 grenade launchers, and Javelin missiles, then disengaged at speed across terrain no pursuer could match. They took no casualties requiring evacuation. The contrast with American operations was doctrinal, not a question of competence. American special operations emphasized force protection and guaranteed evacuation, shaped by experiences such as the 1993 Battle of Mogadishu, depicted in the film Black Hawk Down. That doctrine placed Western Iraq beyond acceptable risk parameters. The Australians, whose tradition accepted operating without assured evacuation, filled the gap. There, 42 days in the desert meant sleeping in shallow scrapes, eating limited rations, managing water meticulously, maintaining vehicles in extreme dust and heat, and sustaining constant alertness. Selection and training prepared them for precisely this endurance. While American forces executed a rapid armored advance on Baghdad, the Australians conducted an invisible campaign. Satellites and aircraft could not smell exhaust fumes or notice fresh boot prints in sand, but men on the ground could. Multiple launchers intended as second strike assets or located and destroyed the feared missile attacks on Israel. Never materialized when the combat phase ended. The Australians drove their dust-covered vehicles back to coalition bases after thousands of kilometers. Faces darkened by sun and beards grown from necessity, they appeared like desert veterans from another era. Their Land Rovers carried weeks of ammunition, fuel, water, and spare parts, evidence of total self-reliance. For 42 days the red zone belonged to them. They found what satellites missed, neutralized a strategic threat, captured a major air base, and conducted firefights against superior numbers without losing a single man, requiring evacuation. They did so without media coverage, without headlines, and largely without public recognition. No Scud fell on Tel Aviv, no regional war ignited. The catastrophe that might have unfolded never happened. Prevented disasters leave no photographs and rarely earn applause. Yet between March 18th and April 30th, 2003, when it mattered most, the Australian Special Air Service Regiment was there. They went west when others would not. They stayed when doctrine said leave. They accomplished what machines could not. And they returned home quietly, having altered the course of the war.